The man who ate what others feared to touch. You're sitting in the corner of a cold stone room, the kind where secrets echo louder than screams. There's a man across from you. He's not speaking, just chewing. Slowly, deliberately. You can hear every bite tendon snapping, bones crunching, meat tearing. But the thing he's eating, it isn't cooked. It isn't even dead. And it's not fear that you feel. It's something stranger. A question forming, slowly, at the back of your skull. What happens to a man who is always, endlessly, impossibly hungry? His name is Charles Domery, and they used to call him the starved soldier. A mercenary, a prisoner, a medical mystery. But before all that, he was something far more disturbing. A man who didn't eat like an animal. A man who ate animals alive. You're not watching this through a history book. You're inside it now. This is 1799. You're in a prison on the English coast. The walls smell like mildew and regret. Guards whisper about the prisoner in cell 3, not because he's violent, but because he's consuming, unstoppable. He eats the candles. He eats his boots. He eats the rats that dare sneak into his cell. It sounds like a legend made to scare children. But the records exist. Government seals, doctors' notes, witness testimonies. And still, none of them could answer the one question that matters. What kind of hunger makes a man devour a living cat, fur and all, just to quiet the storm in his stomach? The year is 1799. The British Navy has just captured a French warship. Among the crew is a Polish-born soldier with a dull gaze and a wild history, Charles Domery. They throw him into prison like any other enemy. But unlike the others, Domery doesn't riot, doesn't beg, doesn't plan escape. He just asks for more food, and more, and more. The guards think it's a joke. They give him double rations. He finishes them before the others have sat down. They give him 8 times the regular serving. Gone, unchewed, swallowed like he's racing death itself. And when the food runs out, he doesn't wait. He bites into candles, swallows a bar of soap, hunts a rat, and eats it raw. The other prisoners begin avoiding him, not because he's cruel, but because something about him feels like a hole in the world, a hole that no light or bread or kindness can ever fill. The whispers reach the ears of the prison's doctor. He's skeptical. This must be an exaggeration. Sailors are full of tall tales. But when he visits Charles's cell, what he finds shakes something in him. Not fear. Something colder. Scientific curiosity. Here is a man whose stomach seems bottomless, who eats not for pleasure, not even for survival, but as if he's chasing something through food, as if every bite gets him closer to something lost long ago, or maybe something never born. But let's step back, just for a moment. Look closer at Charles's eyes. You expect madness, but instead, there's something eerily calm. A kind of resignation, as if he's known since birth that he would never be normal. You ask, "Why do you eat like this?" And he replies, not with defiance, but a whisper, "Because I remember being hungry once, and I can never go back." What did that moment look like? The one that broke his hunger switch forever? Was it a famine? A punishment? Or did the world simply forget to feed him again and again, until his body rebelled against the idea of enough? In the following days, they perform experiments on him. These are not the kind you'd expect in a clean laboratory. These are crude, medieval tests born from confusion and wonder. They give him 4 pounds of raw beef. He eats it in 8 minutes. They give him candles, soap, a live cat, You look away. But the sound doesn't stop. That wet, clicking sound of teeth on something that shouldn't be eaten. The guards vomit. The doctor trembles. But Charles, he licks the blood from his fingers and simply asks, "Do you have more?" Was he cursed or chosen? Was his hunger a disease or a mirror showing us what we all might become if we stripped away civility, reason, and fear? You wonder if, in a different world, Charles could have been saved. If someone had caught him younger, hugged him tighter, fed him warmer meals. Maybe, just maybe, the monster inside would have never awoken. But here he is now, in front of you, chewing, silently, staring into nothing. And the worst part isn't what he's eaten, it's that he looks peaceful. But this is only the beginning. Because Charles didn't start in that prison. No one is born a myth. They're made, forged in cold houses and empty bowls, shaped by the sharp hands of poverty, war, and neglect. So we go back to where the hunger began, to a land where food was scarcer than bullets, and where a boy named Charles learned that if you didn't eat the unthinkable, you didn't eat at all. Born in a country that couldn't feed him, where winter stole more than warmth, it stole identity. You close your eyes, and the wind speaks. It's not the kind of wind that dances through leaves. It's a cold hiss, sharp, metallic, like the edge of a whisper spoken through clenched teeth. It carries the scent of boiled potatoes and black soil, of damp blankets and hunger that clings to skin like a second layer. The year is 1786. Somewhere outside Warsaw, in a crumbling wooden house, a child is born. You don't hear a cry, not immediately. The child is quiet at first, as if confused by the air around him. Maybe he was already trying to listen, to count the sounds of food that wasn't coming. His name is Charles Domery, though history will anglicize it into Charles. But names are luxuries in a land this broken. This is Poland in the late 18th century. Not a romantic land of poets and revolutionaries, but a nation being dismantled, one treaty at a time. Its soil is starved, its borders bleeding. The first partition has already carved away its dignity, and the second, just years away, will steal even more. But you don't care about empires now. You care about the child. You watch him, his ribs already visible before he can walk. His mother feeds him broth made of cabbage water and hope. His father is a soldier, gone more often than present. And when he is home, his silence is heavier than his sword. There's no warmth in the house, only the tightrope tension of survival. The neighbors call the Domery boy odd, not because he's violent, not because he's sick, but because he eats everything, not greedily, just thoroughly. Grass, bark, insects, crumbs off muddy boots. He pulls roots from the garden soil with his bare hands and chews them raw, his eyes distant, as though he's searching for something inside the taste. You think maybe it's just a phase, but then the chickens begin disappearing. And soon after, the rats. And one day, after a week without bread, his older brother finds him gnawing on leather straps. You ask yourself, what happens to a child when hunger isn't a passing pain, but a permanent state? Some children cry, some steal, but Charles consumes. He begins to out-eat grown men. His mother can't keep up. At 10, he's already taller than his cousins. Not fat, just wide, sturdy, built like famine couldn't kill him, even if it tried. And yet, he's always hungry, always. Not whining, not desperate, just waiting quietly for more. There are no diagnoses in this village, no eating disorders, no psychological trauma. There's only gossip and the growing fear that the Domery boy might not be right. But how do you raise a child in a place where bread is more precious than gold? The local priest calls him cursed. The baker stops selling to his mother. The other children stop inviting him to play, not out of cruelty, but because he scares them. They say they saw him kill a rabbit with his bare hands once. They say he ate its heart before the body cooled. You don't know if it's true, but somehow you believe it. Now he's 12, tall, strong, silent, still eating. And this is when the wars come closer. France is burning with revolution, and the fire reaches Eastern Europe like a wave of madness. Poland becomes a chessboard of foreign powers, and hungry boys are useful pieces. Charles doesn't need to be conscripted. He volunteers. Not because he believes in liberty, not because he wants glory, but because the military promises 3 meals a day. And for someone like him, that's a dream too good to ignore. You imagine him walking away from the wooden house, his mother watching from the doorway with hollow eyes. She doesn't stop him. Maybe she knows she can't feed him anymore. Maybe she's relieved. He joins the French Revolutionary Army, a foreign tongue, foreign soil, foreign rules. But food is food. And this army, though chaotic and blood-soaked, at least knows how to feed its machines. Charles isn't a hero. He isn't a killer. He's something else entirely. A stomach in a uniform. They give him rations. He finishes them in minutes. They double them. Triple. Still not enough. He begins bargaining, offering to clean boots, carry supplies, dig trenches, anything for more. And when the food runs out, well, you already know what happens when the food runs out. But here's the twist. He's not hated. Not yet. In fact, the other soldiers begin to admire him. Charles is unbreakable. He marches longer, carries heavier loads, never complains, never tires. They call him the Bull, or sometimes just Monsieur, the Eater. They laugh at him, but it's a nervous kind of laughter, the kind you hear before the lights go out. And late at night, in the camps, when the moon is a silver eye staring down at broken men, you can hear Charles chewing, always chewing. Let's pause. Let's return to that boy in Poland, gnawing leather and licking grease from cracked bowls. Now look at the man he's become, alone in a sea of uniforms, wearing a badge not of rank, but of consumption. The question returns, what if this isn't a disease? What if it's a memory, a hunger that isn't in the body, but in the soul? And still, Charles hasn't become a legend. Not yet. That comes later, when the food is gone again, when the cold returns, when the other soldiers grow thin, and Charles stays the same. Because he knows something they don't. He knows how to eat what shouldn't be eaten. When war is not the worst thing you've survived, and the front line is quieter than his stomach, close your eyes again. Listen, not to the scream of cannons, but to something more terrifying. The sound of a man eating in silence, while a dozen starving soldiers pretend not to notice. This isn't a war story the way you're used to it. There are no heroes here, no rising trumpet, no golden cause. There's just mud, the metallic sting of blood in the nose, and a man named Charles Domery, who sits cross-legged in the frostbitten corner of a French Revolutionary Army trench, biting through raw cow lung like it's bread soaked in wine. And still, he looks unsatisfied. It's 1793 now. The French Revolution is no longer poetry. It's violence made systematic. Heads fall in Paris while boots march across Europe. One desperate army after another, fed on ideals, but starving for bread. Charles is 15. He's already taller than most officers. His shoulders stretch the seams of his tattered coat. They call him the furnace. Not for his temper, for his belly. A walking blaze that food disappears into. In camp, he's useful. He works hard, carries the wounded, digs latrines, does anything for extra rations. He never sleeps longer than a few hours, never smiles, and never leaves food untouched. But at the front, something begins to change. Rations are late, supply lines break. The revolution promises equality, but hunger is always a hierarchy. The officers eat first. The soldiers squabble over what remains. And Charles, he begins to hunt. Not people, but everything else. You hear the story from a fellow soldier's diary. It's scrawled in blood-stained pencil, barely legible. The Pole ate his own boots. I watched, boiled them in piss water and chewed for hours. Didn't even flinch. Another writes, Domery says hunger is a god. We just serve it differently. It sounds like madness. But when your stomach has been empty for 3 days, and you watch a man calmly gnaw through raw entrails with eyes full of peace, you begin to wonder if he knows something you don't. The day the cow is bombed is the day he crosses the line. A mortar hits the edge of the field kitchen. A cow, meant for the next day's stew, is ripped in half by the blast. Its organs spill into the trench. Blood, still warm, soaks the dirt. Men scream. Some vomit. One loses his arm. But Charles wades through the mud like a man possessed. He tears the lung from the beast's open chest, still steaming, bits of charred hair clinging to it. He doesn't wait for fire. He doesn't wait for orders. He eats. Was it instinct, desperation, or just memory? Because unlike the others, Charles has been here before. As a child in Poland, staring down frost and famine, he learned this: you either eat or you vanish, and he refuses to vanish. Soon, his eating becomes legend in the unit. They test him. One dares him to swallow a handful of salted fat left in the sun for 3 days. He does, with no expression. Another throws a bet. A full sheep's liver, raw and bloody, eaten in under 15 minutes. He does it in 8. They laugh. They cheer. But always from a distance. Because something about Charles feels wrong. Not evil. Not cruel. Just unnatural. As if the war didn't twist him. As if he was already bent when he arrived. Then comes the cat. A ration delay. 5 days. The men are growing thin. Faces sink. Morale plummets. A black cat slips into camp. Some men cheer, hoping it might be caught, cooked, shared. Charles doesn't wait. He corners it, snatches it by the spine. And while the others are still deciding whether to build a fire, he tears it apart with his hands and teeth. You freeze. You want to say it's exaggeration. You want to believe it's campfire myth. But the reports are consistent. The blood was real. The sound, even now, one soldier wrote, still haunts him. He didn't do it out of madness. That's what made it worse. He did it like someone folding laundry. Like it was routine. They stop mocking him after that. They stop sitting near him. Charles doesn't notice. Or maybe he does, and just doesn't care. Because when you live your whole life with a hunger that never sleeps, you stop needing approval. You just need meat. Raw, warm, moving. It doesn't matter. And this is where the story shifts. Because up until now, he's been a curiosity, a sideshow, the hungry man. But war doesn't tolerate too many questions. And soon, even the officers start to worry. They begin asking, what will he eat when there's no cow? What will he do when even the rats are gone? And so, in 1799, when Charles is caught aboard a French ship by the British, They don't treat him like a normal prisoner. They isolate him. They watch him, because by now, his name has spread, not as a threat, but as a mystery. And mystery, in wartime, is dangerous. But for Charles, it's just another place to eat. Even captivity cannot shrink his hunger. Because while war might end, his stomach doesn't know that. His hunger doesn't recognize peace, or pity, or prison. And neither will you. Because once you see what Charles does next, you won't forget it. Not for a long time. The mercenary who chewed through discipline, when the cell is locked, but the hunger is free. The lock clicks shut, not with the authority of justice, but with hesitation. Like even the guard knows the door means nothing. You're in Liverpool now. The year is 1799. The Revolutionary Wars are churning, and prisoners of war spill into British cells like stormwater. But among the dozens brought in from the captured French warship Hoche, one name is passed between soldiers like a ghost story. The Polish one. Don't let him near the food stores. They say he eats candles. I heard he bit a cat in half. Charles Domery. They don't call him that yet, not really. In the records, he's just prisoner No. 37. But in the whispers, the eater. The beast in the barracks. You can hear them laugh. Nervously. Because this isn't about danger. It's about discomfort. About watching a man eat, not for joy, not for necessity, but for something deeper, something religious. You walk past his cell. The air smells like grease and wax. He's sitting cross-legged on the floor, chewing something pale and soft. You realize it's a candle, half melted, still warm from someone else's lantern. He glances at you, not with shame, not even with curiosity, just acknowledgement. Like he's seen your type before, the type that thinks it can understand hunger. The British guards don't know what to do with him. At first, they assume it's all lies. Stories from starving men to pass time. They test him. A bowl of raw beef, a pound of tallow, a handful of soap. He eats it all. No gagging, no expression. Just methodical consumption, as if he's following instructions only he can hear. Then he asks, politely, for more. The prison surgeon, Dr. Johnston, is called in. He watches the man swallow 4 pounds of raw cow udder in less than 15 minutes. He records it. No sign of indigestion, no fatigue, no remorse. He tries to speak with Charles, to pull meaning from the silence between bites. But Charles speaks little English. His French is broken, Polish, unheard by the staff. So he gestures, points at his belly, rubs his stomach, smiles. A wide, vacant smile that somehow feels like a scream, muffled under meat. Here's what they learn. Charles eats 4 to 5 pounds of raw beef a day, if available. He'll eat candles, soap, and leather without hesitation. When a fellow prisoner kills a rat, Charles offers to eat it for him. One guard writes, "He gnawed off the foot of a boot, chewed through the leather, spat out the nails." Another. He asks not for books, nor for pen. Only meat. Always meat. The cell becomes a laboratory. Charles is the experiment, though he never consents, never complains. The prison begins to deliver him daily portions of raw meat, just to see how far the body can go. Some days, 16 pounds vanish into his mouth before nightfall. And the most disturbing part? He never gains weight, never bloats, never sweats, never slows. He sleeps a little, wakes early, quiet, cooperative, until the food runs low. Then he grows restless, paces, stares at his own hands, stares at yours. Theories start swirling. One doctor claims he suffers from polyphagia, a rare disorder of endless appetite. Another insists it's psychological trauma from early famine. A third whispers what no one wants to write down. Perhaps he's not sick. Perhaps he is simply no longer human in the way we understand. But let's talk about discipline. Because in British prison, there are rules. There are punishments. There is order. And Charles follows none of it. Not out of rebellion, not with violence, but with a simple, slow erosion of control. Like water through rock. Guards stop trying to ration him. It only leads to chaos. He sneaks into other prisoners' meals, consumes food meant for 10 men. One day, a soldier strikes him for stealing. Charles doesn't fight back. He just looks at the man and bites into a block of tallow with such intensity that the room goes silent. He's not trying to threaten. That's the terror of it. He doesn't know how terrifying he is. Then one night, a cat gets into the prison. Nobody speaks of what happened next in full. But the next morning, a young guard quits. He doesn't file a report. He just says he was smiling, and there was fur between his teeth. You want to ask, why doesn't he stop? Doesn't he feel shame? Doesn't he want to be normal? Doesn't he crave control? But perhaps that's the illusion, the comfort we wrap around ourselves. Because maybe Charles never had control. Maybe he stopped chasing normal when he realized no one would ever meet him halfway. Maybe he eats not just to feed the body, but to prove he exists. To say, I was here, I mattered, even if only as a mouth. Let's pause. Again. You're a prisoner now, in the cell across from him. You haven't eaten in 2 days. You watch Charles devour the gristle off a bone someone else threw away. And for the first time, you don't feel disgust. You feel jealousy. He doesn't beg. He doesn't fear. He just consumes, as if the world can't hurt you when it's inside you. But even prisons have limits. And soon, the prison isn't enough. Because Charles isn't just a curiosity now. He's a question science cannot answer. And someone in a dark office with clean hands and colder intentions wants to test him further. Not for cruelty, but for understanding. The Night of the Cat. Horror in the tent, where the line between hunger and horror disappears. They never forgot that night. Not because of the moon, full and pale like a dying eye. Not because of the cold, which had turned the tents into coffins lined with canvas. Not even because of the silence, broken only by distant musket fire. They remembered it because of the sound. Not of screams, not of sobs. The sound of chewing, wet, rhythmic, intentional. You're inside a French military encampment, sometime in the winter of 1794, the year of betrayal, the year of rations run dry, the year hunger made murder seem less sinful than patience. They were dug in, near the Rhine. The fields were ice. The rivers choked. Bread came only in dreams now, and even those were getting rarer. Charles Domery, not yet 20, is squatting in the corner of a shared canvas tent. 10 soldiers, thin as skeletons, crowd around a single pot of boiled water and hope. No meat, no potatoes, just bits of soaked linen and the hallucination of stew. A rustle, then a meow. You don't see it at first, but the moment it enters, a small black cat, ribs visible through fur, the temperature inside the tent changes. Some laugh. A few reach out gently. Someone mutters, "If only we had milk." But Charles doesn't wait. He's on it in seconds. No hesitation, no announcement. One hand, one scream, one bite. They say he ripped it open with his teeth. They say the cat's cry was short, too short, They say blood sprayed against the tent wall like someone had spilled wine. But here's what no one says out loud. No one stopped him. One soldier threw up in his sleeve. Another left the tent and never returned. But most just sat, frozen. Not from cold, but from something deeper, something older. Because in that moment, Charles wasn't a man. He wasn't even a soldier. He was hunger made flesh. He didn't speak. He just kept eating, tearing strips from fur, gnawing bones, licking blood from his fingers like it was grease from roasted duck. You try to imagine it. You want to tell yourself it was madness, that he was hallucinating, that the starvation made him lose his grip. But when the soldiers confronted him later, whispering, trembling, do you know what he said? He looked at them with quiet confusion and asked, "What would you have done if you were hungry?" And that's the part that haunts you. Because he wasn't ashamed. He wasn't proud either. He just couldn't see the crime. That night, everything shifted. The camp no longer laughed at him. They didn't taunt him for his appetite or dare him to eat strange things. They avoided him, like an old well said to house a demon. Even the officers began to whisper, and in the dark, men would clutch their rations tighter when he walked by. But you're still thinking about the cat, aren't you? Not because of what it was, but because of what it revealed. That Charles had no boundaries. Not in the way you do. Not between food and flesh. Not between need and want. Not even between what lives and what must be left alone. Was it illness? Or had he simply been born into a world that taught him there was nothing sacred left to preserve? In his cell years later, when asked again about the incident, Charles blinked slowly and said, "I did not like the fur." And nothing more. Not an apology, not a defense, just a fact, like someone discussing the weather. And you realize something now. Charles is not a villain. He is not a madman. He is a mirror. And what you see in that mirror depends on how hungry you've ever truly been. Because some say, "That's disgusting. I'd never." But others, quieter, perhaps more honest, whisper, "I don't know. I might." And that's the real horror. Not that Charles ate the cat, but that some part of you understands why. And yet, he lives on, continues to serve. No court-martial, no exile, no punishment. Because you don't punish the weather. You don't arrest the ocean for drowning a man. You just try to survive around it. But even armies have limits. And when Charles is eventually captured by the British in 1799, he doesn't protest. He doesn't beg. He asks only one question. Will there be meat? They thought they were jailing a soldier, but what they were really doing was caging a force. And soon, the cell walls wouldn't be enough, because Charles wasn't a story to be silenced. He was a puzzle to be solved. Captured by the British, but never contained. When the cage becomes a stage, and the hunger performs, you expect a fight. After all, they've captured a soldier, a revolutionary, a French-aligned mercenary with a body built from war and raw meat. But Charles doesn't resist. He doesn't curse the enemy, doesn't flinch at the rifles or bark at the orders. He just sits down quietly on the deck of the British ship that captured him in 1799 and asks, "Can I have something to eat?" And in that moment, every soldier within earshot realizes something unsettling. They haven't captured a man. They've inherited a problem. They bring him to Liverpool, to a prison called Fortin Barracks. The walls are thick, the bed's cold. It is a place designed to break ordinary men. But Charles isn't ordinary. He doesn't cry. He doesn't rebel. He doesn't even ask about his sentence. He just waits for food. And when it comes, a standard prisoner's ration of a pound of bread and a pint of soup, he finishes it in minutes. Then, he waits again. By evening, he's gnawing the tallow from his own candle. By morning, they find the heel of his boot chewed to shreds. By midday, he's licked the soap dish clean. The guards think it's a joke. They assume he's trying to get more food. Some prisoners trick, but the days go on. The rations keep coming, and Charles keeps eating. All of it. One morning, he vomits. Not from illness, but because he ate a bundle of linen cloth, torn from the inside of his uniform. He didn't know why. Just said, it felt soft. They isolate him. Not for punishment, but for observation. Doctors are summoned. Among them is Dr. Thomas Cochrane, a naval surgeon who will write one of the strangest medical reports of the century. He watches Charles consume, over several days, 4 pounds of raw cow's udder, 2 pounds of beef fat, 12 candles, wax and all, several handfuls of grass from the prison yard, live rats, caught with his bare hands and eaten whole. Not once does Charles vomit. Not once does he sleep longer than a few hours. And not once does he ask why they're watching. Only, do you have more? The doctors begin to debate. Some say polyphagia, the medical term for insatiable appetite. But even that doesn't explain his digestion. He eats like a furnace, but remains lean, alert, functional. No bloating, no fatigue, no end. They run tests. They double his food, then triple it. He eats it all. The guards begin a list. Charles Domery's appetite. Week 1, 16 pounds of raw beef, 2 dozen candles, 5 pounds of bread, 1 leather belt, 2 bars of soap, 1 live cat, confirmed. By the end of the week, they've stopped writing. Because what do you do with a list that never ends? And yet, Charles is polite, always grateful, always still. It's as if his body is a storm, but his voice is a whisper. He doesn't demand. He doesn't beg. He simply exists. As a whole, the world keeps trying to fill. One guard begins calling him the furnace. Another calls him the well without bottom. But the most accurate name comes from a young doctor in training who watches Charles quietly one night, tearing the skin from a rat like a butcher might slice a peach. He writes in his journal, "He is not a man. He is what man becomes when survival erases all else." And that's the core of it, isn't it? Charles isn't broken. He's evolved, not towards some higher being, but into a machine of consumption, a mouth with memory, a body shaped not by desire, but by deficiency. Let's pause. You're a fellow prisoner now, across the hall. You've been rationed the same pitiful loaf, the same gray broth. But while you grow thinner, Charles does not. And one night, you wake to a scraping sound. You open your eyes. He's in your cell, not angry, not sneaking, just holding a piece of soap you left behind. He looks at you, and you realize he didn't break in for violence. He broke in for a taste. And the worst part? You hand it to him, because somehow you want to see what he does next. Eventually, word spreads. He becomes a case study, a phenomenon. Doctors write about him in journals with titles like "On the Curious Appetite of a French Prisoner," "A Digestive Anomaly in British Custody." And behind every sentence, a silent message. We do not understand this man. But maybe he wasn't meant to be understood. Maybe he's not here to be studied. Maybe Charles is just a walking memory of the famine the world tries to forget. You ask yourself, as you watch him eat a candle whole, what is it like to be this hungry and still so calm? What is it like to be feared not for violence, but for absence? Not madness, not cruelty, just a void with teeth. But Charles isn't done. Not yet, because the British still have one thing left to offer: a medical experiment. Not cruel, not illegal, just curious. How far can he go? And the answer will be written in blood, beef, in the silence of a man who never once says no. The medical test. No human should endure, when the body should break, but the hunger does not. There's a long wooden table in the center of the room. It's the kind of table meant for discussions, for dignified conversation between learned men in powdered wigs and polished shoes. But today, it's not a table for talking. It's a feeding trough, and at the end of it, shirt rolled to the elbows, eyes blank, jaw relaxed, sits Charles Domery, the prisoner, the mystery, the man who once ate a live cat under canvas. Only now, he's the subject, the test, the experiment. The year is 1799, still. We're back in Fortin Barracks, though this room smells different from the rest of the prison. It smells of blood, of grease, of something ancient being summoned. Because this is the day the British military doctors, curious, skeptical, half-mad with professional pride, decide to ask a question history has never dared to pose aloud. How much can a human being eat before the body stops? They've seen Domery devour 6 pounds of raw meat before lunch. They've watched him gnaw candle wax like sugar cubes, bite leather belts in half, and swallow rats like dates. But now, they want more than observation. Now, they want to push him, not to harm him, they insist, just to see where the bottom is. It begins at dawn. No breakfast, but Charles doesn't complain. He sits patiently as the plates are brought out, not 1 or 2, but a dozen. Boiled beef, raw suet, stewed liver, fatback soaked in cold broth, cow udders, boiled until gray and quivering. To a normal man, it's grotesque. To Charles, it's an invitation. The doctors watch with quills poised. He begins with the raw beef, 4 pounds of it, folded into his mouth with startling calm. He doesn't chew much, just enough to swallow without choking. Then the cow udder, rubbery, pale, slick with collagen. He rips it with his teeth. It takes him 7 minutes. The fatback vanishes next. Thick slabs, uncooked, still oozing white threads of connective tissue. He tears them like bread, cheeks slick with grease. By the time he finishes the beef suite, the room is quiet. Even the guards are no longer sneering. Someone asks, "Should we stop him?" Another whispers, "He hasn't even broken a sweat." Then come the candles. 6 of them, tallow sticks, soft from the warmth of the room. He eats them one by one, licking his fingers afterward. There is no gag, no flinch. He chews through the wick like it's a strand of licorice. Then something worse. A leather belt, thick, cracked, stained. Charles asks for water. They give him a tin cup. He dips the belt into it, softens the hide, and chews. It takes him an hour. Not because he slows down, but because the leather resists. He doesn't fight it, he respects it. And when it's gone, he sits back. Breath steady, eyes distant. The doctors are pale now. One writes in his notes, "No illness, no sweat, no visible discomfort. Body temperature unchanged. Digestion, seemingly effortless." But here's where the test changes. They bring in a final plate, a bucket of chopped animal lungs and liver, barely rinsed, the blood still clinging in ropes. They want to break him, not from cruelty, but from disbelief. Surely this is too much. Surely the body must revolt. Surely the human stomach, however mutated, must scream eventually. He smiles. That blank, boyish smile that doesn't reach his eyes. And then he begins. 20 minutes in, the bucket is half empty. One of the doctors excuses himself and vomits outside. Charles doesn't pause. He swallows pieces whole, like a man drinking from a well. And you, watching from the corner, feel something stir in your throat. It isn't nausea, it's pity. Because suddenly, you don't see a monster. You see a boy in Poland, barefoot and starved, watching his mother boil cabbage for a family of 10. You see frost-bitten fingers gripping bark from a tree. You see a child learning that if you don't eat everything, you get nothing. He finishes the bucket, leans back, not triumphant, just full, for now. The room is silent. One doctor mutters, "It's not just the appetite, it's the absence of limits. That's what frightens me." Another whispers, "This isn't consumption. It's a conversation between him and hunger." And he's never stopped listening. They ask him how he feels. He shrugs. Tired, a little. Then he asks for a piece of bread to cleanse the taste. They give it to him. He eats it slowly, as if that was the course he liked most. No medical conclusion is ever officially published about this test. It becomes an anecdote, passed between military surgeons and prison officials. A curiosity, a medical joke. But in the margins of an old journal found decades later, one line is underlined 3 times. His hunger is not a symptom, it is a system. And perhaps that's the real answer. Charles Domery wasn't sick. He wasn't possessed. He wasn't even exceptional in the way geniuses are. He was simply built differently, made in the cold ovens of poverty, forged by winters that took more than warmth. They took the concept of enough. And when they ask him, years later, if he ever felt full, he thinks. Then answers, in halting French, "Only once, after I ate a sheep's lung, but I was also drinking wine. Maybe it was the wine." The test ends. But Charles doesn't. Because his body is a mystery, yes. But his soul, that's something else entirely. The legend that no one wanted to believe, when the truth is too strange for memory to keep. Legends are usually built from valor, vision, victory. But some legends, the ones told in whispers behind closed doors, are born from something else. Discomfort. You're in a classroom now. It's the mid-1800s, decades after Charles Domery has died. Wherever and however that may have happened, a young medical student flips through a dusty case file labeled only "Extraordinary Case." Subject CD. He finds notes on consumption, on animal fat, on candles, cats, cow lungs, and one phrase repeated again and again by doctors who clearly didn't know what they were dealing with. Unnatural appetite. Appears healthy. Behavior unexplainable. The student laughs, closes the folder, calls it impossible. And just like that, Charles Domery begins to vanish from history. Because here's the thing. The human mind has limits, not just of knowledge, but of tolerance. You can accept war. You can accept disease. You can even accept madness. But what do you do with a man who breaks every rule of digestion, dignity, and decency, and does so without apology? Domery's story circulates in strange places, not textbooks, not official military history, but in letters between prison wardens, footnotes in medical journals, tavern whispers passed between old sailors who claim they once saw the man who ate through a rat like it was buttered bread. One prison cook recalls, "He never asked for seconds. He asked for the pot." A guard's journal, rediscovered decades later, includes this: "I once saw him eat 10 pounds of raw meat, then sit quietly and hum to himself. Not a song, just noise, like the sound of waiting. And this is where Charles stops being a prisoner. He becomes a paradox, a question the 19th century didn't want to answer, because to write him into the official record would mean admitting that the body is capable of terrifying things, that famine leaves scars deeper than the skin, that not all monsters are cruel, some are just hungry. You imagine the few who tried to argue for his inclusion in history. Perhaps an eccentric professor, perhaps a young doctor fresh with wonder. They're laughed out of the room. You expect us to believe a man ate candles and lived? Come now, be serious. This isn't science, it's folklore. And maybe that's the saddest part. Not that he was feared, not that he was used, but that he was dismissed, as if being unexplainable meant being unworthy of remembrance. But Charles wasn't trying to be remembered. He wasn't trying to be anything. He was just trying to survive. And in doing so, he accidentally became immortal, not through statues, not through triumphs, but through the inability of the world to ever forget the phrase, "He ate a live cat and asked for more." He drifts through history like smoke through a broken window. No grave, no eulogy, no official end. He just disappears. Sometime around 1800, according to most records. One version says he died peacefully in captivity, still chewing on a piece of leather as the guards checked the logs. Another says he escaped, vanished into the British countryside, and was seen decades later in a remote village, still lean, still hungry, still alone. You wonder what that would look like. An old man in rags, asking gently for raw meat, eating in silence, eyes never quite focused. Not dangerous, just not here. Some say they found wax stubs missing from a chapel in Yorkshire, the candles bitten, teeth marks wide as a man's thumb. Others say rats started vanishing from prison cells again, just like before. No one could prove anything, but no one quite wanted to look. And this is how myths work, isn't it? Not with certainty, but with resistance to being forgotten. One final note is found, decades later, in a French military archive, a torn field journal, signed by a now unknown sergeant. The ink is faded, the words barely legible, but the last line is underlined twice. He was not like us, but I'm not sure he ever wanted to be. Let's be honest now. Do you remember every general, every soldier, every king? No. But somehow, you remember him. The eater, the stranger, the man whose stomach outlived his story. Because Charles Domery wasn't a man history chose. He was a man history couldn't explain, and so it tried to erase him. But he's still here, in journals, in rumors, in the footnotes of the impossible. And maybe that's enough. The anatomy of a void, a psychological autopsy. What happens when emptiness is all you've ever known? Let's turn the light off for this part. No torches, no fire, just the dark. Because to understand Charles Domery now, not as a body, not as a case, but as a mind, we have to sit still, quiet, patient, as if we are listening to something hollow, something that echoes. This isn't a biography anymore. It's an autopsy, not of flesh, but of emptiness. They say his appetite was unnatural, that he consumed the inedible. But no one ever asked, what consumed him? You're lying on a cot now, somewhere in the dark, across from Charles. You hear him breathing, not snoring, just breathing. Rhythmic, deep, like the slow inhale of a man who never forgets there might not be a next meal. And suddenly, you wonder, was Charles ever full? Not just his stomach, but his mind, his soul. Was there ever a moment he felt whole? Or was he just born hollow, shaped by a world that never fed him what mattered? Let's go back to Poland, 1780s. Famine wasn't a metaphor there. It was a season. You didn't cry when there was no bread. You just slept longer. You didn't scream when the snow came too early. You chewed bark and pretended it was stew. And maybe, at some point, little Charles stopped expecting to feel full, stopped waiting for satisfaction, and began to believe that the world was a test, and hunger was the only truth that wouldn't lie to him. So, he adapted, not emotionally, biologically. He became the only thing that survives long winters, a mouth. His condition, if it was a condition, has been studied under labels like polyphagia, hyperthyroidism, damage to the hypothalamus, even Prader-Willi syndrome. But every label carries the same silent footnote. Except this doesn't fully explain him. Because those disorders come with weakness, mental decline, emotional instability, confusion. But Charles, he was calm, focused, cooperative. What he lacked in language, he made up in clarity. And what he craved was not chaos. It was order through consumption. One theory, never published, just whispered between two doctors, went like this. What if he simply doesn't feel what we feel? What if hunger for him is like hearing a violin, constant, background, never-ending, and eating is the only way to make it stop, even for a moment? That's the most haunting idea of all. Not that he was sick, but that he was aware, fully, and had made peace with his emptiness. Imagine that, living a life where the closest you ever come to joy is a bowl of raw liver, and the quiet moment after it's gone, before the hunger starts again. Charles never raged against the world, never cursed the doctors, never blamed his mother, never asked why me, because maybe, in his mind, he wasn't cursed. He was simply honest, more honest than the rest of us. He didn't pretend to be complete. He didn't chase fulfillment in art, in war, in women, in power. He chased only what his body screamed for: substance. Whether it was meat, wax, leather, or soap, he consumed not to conquer, but to survive the absence. And here's something the guards never wrote down, but a fellow prisoner once whispered to a chaplain. He used to hum to himself at night, not songs, just sounds, as if he was filling the silence. And that's the word we come back to again and again: filling. You start to see it now, don't you? Charles wasn't terrifying because of what he ate. He was terrifying because he made us see what true hunger looks like. Physical, yes, but also psychological. A hunger so deep that it becomes your identity. You are not a soldier, not a Pole, not a man. You are a need. He had no children, no wife, no books of his own, no letters, no quoted words of brilliance, only witnesses. And every one of them, regardless of class, country, or education, said the same thing. He ate more than I thought was possible. He looked me in the eye while chewing things no man should chew. He scared me without ever raising a hand. And in that fear, perhaps they glimpsed themselves. Because what is hunger, if not the one emotion every living thing understands? And Charles, he didn't fight his hunger. He became it. There's no monument to Charles Domery, no bronze statue in Warsaw, no grave with his name. Because what do you carve on the headstone of a man whose legacy is emptiness? Here lies a body that never stopped asking for more.
Here lies a body that never stopped asking for more. But now you know him, and that knowledge, small and terrible, lives in you like a question you can't shake. What would you become? if you were never full again. The man who swallowed time, a final whisper, when the mouth closes but the echo does not. Close your eyes. No, really. Close them. Now, imagine you're standing in a small room. No windows, no clocks, just the tick of your own breathing. Across from you is a chair. Empty. But it feels like someone has just left it. Still warm. You don't know why you feel it, but the presence lingers. Faint. Like a scent. Like a voice you heard years ago but never forgot. That's what Charles Domery has become. Not a man, not a case, but a presence. We've walked through the meat and madness, the wax and blood, the strange, slow descent into something that never was human. Or maybe something that always was, just more honest than we could handle. But now, we're not talking about what he ate. Now, we're talking about what he left behind. Not much, on paper. No known children, no last words, no will. Not even a date of death. He simply disappears. Like hunger after the last bite. Gone, but never really gone. And yet, he endures. A footnote in 19th century medical journals. A whisper in prisoner folklore. A strange entry in psychological textbooks. Domery, Charles, subject of extreme polyphagia, documented in British custody. Believed to have eaten raw meat, candles, cats, and live rats. Cause of death unknown. It's clinical, flat, empty. But between those words, something tugs at you. Something resists closure. Because this story, his story, doesn't end. It just pauses. You see, we don't remember Charles because of what he ate. We remember him because of what he symbolized. In an age of excess, of cravings on command, of kitchens always full, of snack-sized desires, the idea of a man who was never full becomes haunting, almost holy, like a saint of starvation, a prophet of the empty. He becomes a mythic reversal. Where most stories are about having too much, Charles is about not having enough. Ever. Not food, not affection, not understanding, not the gentle hand on the shoulder that says, "It's okay, you're safe now." But here's the paradox. He wasn't angry. He didn't scream at the guards, didn't curse the gods, didn't burn down the world for not feeding him. He simply ate. Again, and again, and again. And in that repetition, we see the deepest form of resilience. Because to endure is not always to fight. Sometimes, it's just to continue. To exist, even when existence feels like a question with no answer. Would he survive today? In 2025? Would he be institutionalized? Photographed on TikTok? Labeled weird, feral, has issues? Would he be given pills? Shoved in a corner? Mocked? Maybe, or maybe, just maybe, someone would see through the chewing, through the blank eyes and quiet nods, and say, "You don't want attention, you want peace, and you only know how to find it one bite at a time." Let's imagine that. Let's give him that. In this final whisper. Let's say he's somewhere quiet now. Not in a lab, not in a cell. Just somewhere with no clocks. Where the meals are warm. Where the cold never returns. Where no one stares. And where, for once in his life, he finishes eating and doesn't need more. Because maybe the cruelest thing we ever did to Charles Domery was never letting him be more than a mystery. Never letting him stop chewing. Never asking, "Who hurt you before the hunger came?" And you? You're sitting in the dark again now. But this time, you feel a strange kind of silence. Not absence. Closure. Because sometimes stories don't end with fireworks. Sometimes they end with a full belly. And the sound of someone finally sleeping. Charles Domery. The bottomless soldier. The man who swallowed more than food. He swallowed history's gaze. and never flinched. Now I'll ask you, as the candle flickers one last time, do you know anyone in Vietnamese history who was more eccentric? In your opinion, is eccentricity madness or misunderstood genius? Whose story should we whisper next, together?